Welcome to Day 3 of the World Community Development Conference. Before we hear from today's speakers, let's briefly recap on what happened yesterday. Our first speaker was the formidable, long-time activist, Bernadette McAlliskey, who talked about participative democracy and the challenges we face today, including rising financial inequality and the rise of the right.
And when we talk about participative democracy, unless we're beginning to talk about democratising wealth, we are always going to be lurking in community development. There is another problem that I think that we have to face. I've done a number of those, they wear me out, which is why I'm so glad to be here. Nostalgic trips on 1968. It's 50 years from 1968 and it's 10 years from the peace treaty. So people are organising look-back meetings. 1968 was all over the world for a whole lot of reasons. An outbreak of popular movements of progress and movements of radicalisation and movements to the left. 2018 is a parallel movement of the right. Right across the world. Right across the world. The populist right is rising. Right across the world, the narrative of division and fundamentally that line that ends in fascism. Not saying that we're there, but we are where that begins. We are where that begins. We have a president in America that we are excusing his behaviour on the grounds he may be mentally ill, he may be a puppet for somebody else, he may just be an idiot. He is nonetheless the President of the United States, and he is, at this point, fueling and encouraging the rise of the right and of the seeds of fascism in his own country. We look to the United Kingdom. We look to the last throw of the dice to restore a dying empire in a unilateral right-wing move out of the European Union. We look within the European Union at a fortress Europe that is building its walls against people fleeing wars that Europe and America created in those people's countries. Now, if community development and people working in community development have nothing to say about that, we would need to go home.
We heard from Francisco Carrizai from Guatemala, who spoke about indigenous people's struggles and the role of human rights institutions to realise their rights.
With this, I'm not saying that in Guatemala is a wonderful society, that the injustice and discrimination ended. No, the discrimination, injustice, and political problem is still in Guatemala, but not in the level as we were living in the 80s and the 90s. And that is thank you to all the international community solidarity, but also for the work of the United Nations. And so, what we have today in Guatemala, because of that work, is that we have the Academy of the Mayan Language, or the Mayan Language Academy. We have the Presidential Commission for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination against Indigenous Peoples. We have also the Women Defense, Indigenous Women Defense Office. We have the Guatemalan Indigenous Fund for Development. And in almost in all ministries, we have an indigenous a branch or an indigenous office in Guatemala, in the Guatemalan government.
Jim Ife spoke about the need for a renewed vision for community development, which includes building alliances with the environmental movement as we face shared challenges.
First, stand against capitalism. At least in its current turbocharged neoliberal globalised form, it's destroying communities, destroying the commons, destroying the earth. We need to stand strongly against it and point out its utter destructiveness. And this means we have to assert the value of the commons and of public spaces and of public services, not just to protect what we've got, but as a vision of what we want, of where we want to be, of where we want to go. And it means alliances with the various groups that are opposing capitalism and its consequences. Labour, housing, poverty, and so on. Secondly, we have to, I think, strengthen our alliances with the environmental movement. Partly because that's something that a lot of people are getting excited about and motivated about. Young people who are concerned about the future will mobilise around environmental issues. And the environmental and the social justice movements have to be together because we are on about the same thing. My experience when I was involved in green politics in Australia was that many people in the environmental movement were looking to people like us for help with the social and economic justice and participatory democracy parts of their manifesto. I think people like communities workers have got really important roles to play in the environmental movement. As I said, community is so important in these transitions.
We had 30 panel discussions and workshops on a huge variety of subjects, ranging from Indigenous people's rights to ethics and values in community work practice.
We had very interesting speakers this morning, particularly looking at the Indigenous perspectives and the rights that have been long fought for. But alongside that, Jim Ife talking about the fact that we're now in the Anthropocene age where the human is dominating the environment. We need to be more ecological and promote those sort of values within community development.
I think the conference is quite unique in the sense that there's global people who came from all over the world, 40 different countries, to talk about community development and the importance of community development on the grassroots level. And it's very intriguing to hear other countries that are facing kind of similar problems with ethnic minority groups that we're facing in Ireland with the travelling community.
I'm just out of a workshop on conflict resolution, which was really interesting. I learned loads about Colombia and also a really good critique of how conflict resolution can undermine community development and become colonised by white experts.
Alongside the panel and practice workshops, there was a range of side events, including a lunchtime book launch, and the Rohingya exhibition continued in the library. The conference finished with a dinner which provided opportunities for continued conversations and deepening friendships in a more relaxed setting.
And the gentlest hands, I love the ground. Oh, hard times come.